Hello, everyone. My name is Vanessa de Costa, and I'm so excited to present to you a presentation about guidelines and tips to succeeding in a job interview. So again, I'm Vanessa de Costa, and I'm the founder and owner of Chilombo Global Career Services, which is a career development platform that I launched almost a year ago in January 2019. I'm a public health professional currently working in South Africa in the areas of global health and HIV in data management and data analytics. And so a lot of the career development work I do is with students and early career professionals in the public health, international development, and global health space. And I know my primary audience today, you all are scholars through the Africa's Tomorrow program, all attending, different universities around the States. And so I know some of you are applying to positions or gearing up to do so. So I just wanted to share some tips, some general tips and some specific components from a variety of tasks that are related to succeeding in a job interview. Great. So I hope you all enjoy, and I'll have my contact information at the end. If you all have any questions, feel free to reach out to me via email. All right. All right. So first, this is just a quick overview of what we'll be going over today. So first, I will just be telling you a bit about Chilombo Careers. Next, I'll give you kind of a list of 8 ways to prepare for an interview. We'll then go into interview etiquette, documents to bring to the interview, and then some specific types of interview processes or questions that you may come across. So informational interviews, behavioral interviews, case study interviews, skills tests, and also at the end I'll link some free resources, contact information, as well as some acknowledgments that I have for this presentation. All right, so just a bit about my organization. I mentioned a bit about how I started back in January of this year, of 2019. And some of the career development services that I offer are resume reviews, cover letter reviews, mock interviews. I also do LinkedIn reviews and essay edits and things of that nature. A bit about my background. I mentioned I work in public health. I have my master's degree in public health, specifically in global epidemiology, and my bachelor's of science degree is in psychology. All right, so let's dive right in. So first, I want to talk about 8 ways to prepare for an interview. And so before I kind of go into the depths of this presentation, I will say to everyone who's watching this and to those who, this may get shared with in the future, a lot of what I've crafted is a combination of from my personal experience, from working with clients, from liaising with other public health, career development, consultants, as well as through my research, my online research and resources that I've come across. So of course, these lists and information is not exhaustive, but I think it does give a very good background into really starting your preparations for interviews. All right. So first thing I have on the list is to review the job description. This is very important. Obviously, you want to ensure that you truly are aware of what is required of the position if you're going into an interview. If you've gotten an interview, you likely are ready to have, a good grasp on the job description, but it's always important to review it before the interview. The next thing that's very important, and this is really a huge part of preparing for an interview, is to review the organization's website, social media pages, any related articles. You really, really want to do your research. This can range depending on if you're, interviewing with a large organization that may have tons of blogs and social media and a lot of resources out there written about or by the organization, versus if maybe it's a small organization, newer, a startup where there may not be as much. But be creative in where you're looking, not just obviously on the organization's website, but on LinkedIn pages, blogs that you've come across, Instagram, Twitter, social media is very big now, especially in a lot of industries. So be sure to do your research. In addition to that, don't just research the company itself, but key people. Who would be your manager if you're able to have that information? Who's the CEO or the head of the organization? What are different people doing in the specific department or area that you're working in? Is it an organization that receives grant funding, that works with partners? Who are their partners? What are their grants? Really do your research to really find out what the organization does and who's working for the organization. That'll also not just help you be prepared for the interview and questions that may come up, but also it could help you see as you're going through the process if it's truly an organization that you're interested in working with, and that you can tell, at least from your virtual research, that you are comfortable with the type of culture that is being presented through its online presence. Okay, of course, another important thing, so I'm on number 4, is review your CV or resume, whichever you've submitted, and the cover letter. If it's a cover letter had to be submitted for the position, just be familiar with the documents that you submitted. There are times in interviews when they may ask you very specific things you've mentioned that you will want to be able to expand on. And so you don't want to be caught off guard by anything. And so just be familiar with your documents. All right. Number 5 is kind of like a bonus. And it's something that it really just depends on the situation, the time you have to prepare for an interview, the type of industry you're in, the organization. But it's more so of a long-term thing to always be doing, and something that I recommend for a lot of clients and people that I work with, and even something I'm working on personally for myself to do more of, is to take advantage of a lot of the free online courses and trainings that are out there. If there's something specific that this job description asks for that you may not have, although you got an interview, try to see if there's any sort of online training resource, even if it's just reading an informational article about it, so that you could at least get up to speed and start learning. And it may be a question or a time where you have to kind of explain your experience in something that you may not have a whole lot of experience in, but having done some research and being able to either maybe take a mini course or do something to demonstrate that you're working on building those skills, even if you don't have the practical work experience, is definitely better than nothing. I'll have a slide at the end which can direct you to some resources to do so. A lot of them are focused on international development, but some of the in public health, but some of the websites have, such as LinkedIn Learning and Udemy, have courses for all industries across the board. Okay, so number 6, this is very important, and it's not just important for interviews, but it's also really important for anytime you're in a situation where you have the opportunity to explain your professional self and who you are and what you're trying to do in any sort of networking situation. So that's to craft a response to the "tell me about yourself" question. This is actually, although very general, it is actually a very challenging question, because you want to be able to convey yourself professionally without going into too much detail or boring the interviewer. So it's very important to keep it concise, meaningful. And a great tip that I was given is to really highlight 3 skills that you have as they relate to the position. So that's a recommendation that I have about the "tell me about yourself" question. Be able to describe your academic background, your work experience, just a quick summary, in terms of how it relates to the position, 3 skills you have, and, it's your elevator pitch, essentially, as it relates to the specific position you're applying to. Okay, number 7, brainstorm accomplishments, challenges, and leadership situations from your previous and current roles to answer behavioral questions. I won't go into too much detail now, because I will have a specific slide on behavioral questions. But these are the questions that are: tell me about a time when, have you ever, can you just describe an instance where questions like that, where you have to really go through describing a process, something that you did, and what maybe the challenges and accomplishments were. Again, I'll go into that a bit more detail, but really being able to prepare for those types of questions. But the key is not we're preparing word for word so that you don't sound rehearsed, but that you have ideas of the specific examples that you're going to use. And then my 8th suggestion, an opinion that I believe you all should do when you're preparing for an interview, is to develop 3 questions to ask the interviewer. And so this is very important for 2 reasons, many reasons, but I'll give you 2 main reasons. Number 1, you want to demonstrate that you are serious about the position. You're curious about it, and there's something more that you want to learn. But number 2, you don't just want to demonstrate that, but you truly want to be able to get as much information before you leave that. As many of you may know, with interview processes, it could be a month before you hear back, a week, 2 weeks. It really just depends on so many factors. And so it's often hard to have these questions answered when you're not in the room with that person through email and communicating in between different interview stages. And so you really want to use that time to ask questions, and this is key, that you cannot easily Google or Google at all. You don't want to ask, oh, when was the organization founded, or things that you can find online. You want to be able to ask specific questions about, either what they need, the specific questions about the role that haven't been answered during the interview process or in the job description. You really want to be specific and ask questions. And it's okay to ask logistical questions about the application process, but I recommend not only asking, logistical questions about the timeline, because you do want to demonstrate, your passion for the position in more detail. Okay, so on to slide number 5. So I just have 4 quick points about interview etiquette. Sometimes these things are obvious, but I always like to repeat them and share them, just because I know you all who are the primary audience of this original presentation, the Africa's Tomorrow Scholars, you're all from different countries around the continent, which is quite amazing. And I think one thing I've learned, I'm currently, a bit about me, I'm a Black American is what I identify as, but my mom's Zambian and my dad's Ghanaian and Gambian. But I was born in the UK, but I grew up in the States. And I'm currently living in South Africa. And I previously lived in Rwanda. So my whole life I've kind of been exposed to different cultures, backgrounds, and as I've moved from one place to the next, I've learned that certain things are okay in some places and certain things aren't. And I think interview etiquette, or even just professional things that are considered professional, do vary from country to country. And so I think it's important to share this, especially, a lot of the things that I'll review are, written as I'm a lot of people who are working for, not necessarily in America, because most of my clients actually don't work in America, but they work with US or American-led organizations. And so I think it's important to embrace different cultures, but also understand the requirements of, the country that you may be working for. And so, I just wanted to share some interview etiquette, especially for if you're interviewing with a American organization, whether it's based in your own countries, your own home countries, or based in the States. So again, a lot of these are things that go across our worldwide, but are universal, but I always just like to give that perspective as well. And so of course, dress professionally. I think obviously that's something that's very important. I really am someone who doesn't like to say, some people like to be very specific and only wear black pants or a black skirt or, things of that nature. But I don't believe in being that strict with your dress, but I think, just professional is relatively self-explanatory. And there are a lot of online resources to point you towards what that means as well. Arriving early, I think that's an important one. It's more so just because things could go wrong. I've been in situations where I had trouble finding the place, parking was hectic, it was a hot day and you needed to freshen up before the meeting or before the interview. Traffic, there's so many things that can go wrong if you're taking public transportation. And so I'm someone who likes to err on the side of caution for always, but, for very important things, I just recommend, to the best of your ability, arriving early. Um, and another thing I think, again, and this could be specific to different countries and cultures, but I would say especially for American organizations, firm handshake upon meeting the interviewers. And on to the next point, making eye contact. That's also something that is specifically looked at as beneficial. And I know that that isn't the case in a lot of other cultures that I've been a part of. So I always do just like to share that as well, because there are certain things that I think, and this is something I've learned, that may be professional in one country and may make you uncomfortable in the other. And there's been times where I can say I've experienced, the opposite, that side of it, while being, a guest in another country. And so I just wanted to share some interview etiquette with you all. Great. So the next thing I'm going to delve right in, before we talked about 8 ways to prepare for an interview, and now I'm going to mention a couple documents as well as some additional items to bring to the interview. Okay, so the first thing I'll mention is that these are really that documents that make up your application portfolio. So you likely submitted all, if not most of these when you did apply to the position, but it's always important to have an updated version of all of these things listed here with you, because you never know if maybe you end up referencing a writing sample and you can say, oh, I actually have a copy of this, article or essay or report with me if you would like a copy. Or, they mentioned that they'll check your references and, oh, can you send your references? Oh, happy to send them via email. I also have a paper copy here if you would like. Also just demonstrates the type of employee that you'd hopefully be, someone who's prepared, thinking ahead. So it always helps to have these documents. Maybe you won't even need to take them out of your bag. Maybe it's not a situation where you need to have your resume, cover letter, references, or writing sample on hand, but it's always great to have them and have multiple copies, just because you never know what could happen. And also maybe there'll be someone else, an extra person that you end up meeting for the interview. Usually you know who you're specifically meeting, but there can be cases where you can end up meeting an additional person. And that's especially true with like an in-person informational interview, which I'll talk about a bit later. Another thing to mention is there's just some other miscellaneous items that are important to have. Of course, a pen and a notebook for taking notes. I think it's very helpful to have it during an interview. Writing is something that you should keep at a minimum during an interview, I will mention. So you don't want to be, writing every single thing down. If you're this is more in person. Of course, if you're on the phone, you're able to have that flexibility if they're not, exactly seeing what you're doing, but you don't want to have your head down looking at a notebook. But it is helpful to have a notebook, a pen out, so that you can, here and there jot something down and demonstrate that you're, keeping track of things. Have mints, or gum or something that you can have right before you go into the interview. And, if you have a commute, I've been on a commute for an interview before where you're going through public transportation and maybe you need to freshen up. Always have deodorant or body spray or something with you, just in case. So those are some items that I recommend that you have handy for your interview. So now I'm going to go into types of interviews. So the first thing I want to talk about is an informational interview. And this is something that I love because there's a lot of different ways to go about it. So relatively self-explanatory by the name, but informational interviews are a way to learn more about an organization, its opportunity and its opportunities, with a direct contact at the organization of interest. So this could be that, to my second bullet, some organizations, will publicize that they have an informational interview, but many don't. And so this is something where you have to be proactive, not only reaching out to an organization directly, but even reaching out to individuals who work at that organization to set one up. And so I think, as I mentioned, the third bullet point, using your best judgment with this. You don't want to be emailing every person at an organization trying, with a generic message saying that you want to meet, but you really want to do your research about organizations you're really passionate about, positions you're really passionate about. If you think, okay, there are no formal positions out there, maybe there are, but I really want to be able to gauge more and talk to someone, or this is something I want to do long term, let me try to, connect with someone, give them my elevator pitch, explain why I'm interested, and see if I could set up a brief time that's convenient to them for you to talk. And so I really do recommend, especially in the midst of a job search where you may be applying to positions out here and there, identifying a few organizations that you really are passionate about. You've seen maybe over time they have positions that you would qualify for that are of interest to you, and see if there's a connection or somebody that either personally or through your larger network in order to do so. Okay. So kind of going into how to have a successful informational interview. Informational interviews, there's kind of components that are easier and more challenging. Easier in terms of, okay, you're not likely not to be asked very detailed questions, the behavioral questions, theoretical questions, because, usually it was initiated by by you. And so, you have a chance to just ask generally questions. So that's kind of, that less stress factor. But on the other hand, it is an informational interview can turn into a job opportunity. And so you do still want to be prepared. So you still want to demonstrate that you've done your research about the organization, especially if there are existing roles or you've seen past roles, so that you know what they do and you can demonstrate where you could fit into the position. To the organization. You want to bring your application portfolio because, you don't want to be too abrupt about, forcing your resume and all your documents onto them. But it is, very beneficial to mention that you do have your resume. And even when you have reached out to them initially, you should have, presented that to them as well in your communications. And yeah, you want to be able to prepare yourself in terms of explaining why you're interested in that organization, either now, in the future, current positions, future positions, and express that you are, would love to stay in the loop about things. And so, yeah, I think informational interviews are a great way, not only to, try to further yourself in getting a position, but learning about what opportunities are out there and expanding your network. Okay, so next I'm going to talk about behavioral interviews. And I know I'm going quite a bit fast through the different types of interviews, but I will note that I do post kind of different tips and details through my different social media platforms, as well as through my listserv, which you can join to get more information on this. And then also be sure to ensure that you all get a copy of this presentation as well for reference. Great. And so behavioral interviews are really, as I had mentioned before, they're interview questions that are really trying to get at how you handle certain situations that would come up in a job. Behavioral questions are often applicable across many industries, many fields, specifically my field of public health, very common to see how you'd handle certain situations with coworkers, collaborators, situations, bosses, really just to see how you have handled things in the past to help the interviewer understand how you would handle things in that future position. There's many resources online about typical behavioral interview questions, and a lot of them I've heard in interviews before, and I've put some of the common ones here, sometimes worded slightly different, but all kind of getting at the same thing. So I'll kind of just tell you what some common questions are, and then I'm going to explain to you the most common kind of acronym that's used to answer behavioral questions, which is a STAR method. All right, so some common questions. So I had already mentioned that initial one that's not on the slide, but tell me about yourself. That is not a behavioral question, but it is a very popular interview question. So common behavioral questions. So tell me about a time when you demonstrated leadership ability. So of course you'd want to bring a specific situation. You'd want to, and I'll kind of use the STAR method to go over one of these in a bit. So yeah, you'd want to think of a specific situation where you demonstrated leadership ability. The next question I have on here is, tell me about a challenge you've experienced in the workplace and how you overcame it. Again, you'd want to provide an example of a challenge and then go through the process of overcoming it and the accomplishments that resulted from that. The third question I've listed here is a time of working with minimal supervision. That's common as well. And then the last question that I've listed on here is, tell me about a time when you made a mistake and how you handled it. So these are 4 common questions that you could come about if you are asked behavioral questions in an interview. And so that's why I had mentioned in ways to prepare for an interview, having examples of situations that cover these types of things. I think I know many of you are graduating with bachelor's degrees, and I think, at that time I had very limited work experience. And so I think it's also important to be creative in that you may not be able to pull examples from jobs that you've had over the years, over your time in school or through high school, but you can pull from when you've worked with different organizations, volunteer activities, class projects. As you further go into your career, you do want to be bringing positions that relate most to the position at hand. But when you are at the bachelor's level, especially, it's not expected that you've had, 10 plus different work experiences to draw from. So be creative. One thing I recommend for these is really reflect on everything you've done, everything that's on your CV or resume, to be able to understand, to be able to draw from different experiences that you have. Great. So how to answer these questions? These questions can seem like you could go on forever. And I think one of the biggest challenges that people have, and I even had when I was first kind of dealing with these types of interviews, is ranting and rambling. And so the STAR method is a great way to focus your answer. And so it helps you break up how you'd answer into 4 main components. So the S is situation. So this is where you're setting the scene, you're providing a brief background information about the situation, and you're able to really, tell people what exactly the situation was about. The next component is a task. So you'd say, what specifically were you doing? And you'll provide details about your roles and responsibilities in that situation. You want to I recommend, and this is my personal opinion and through experience, you want to keep the reader engaged in your story and not to go on and on. So really try to limit each section to just a few sentences. If you find yourself going on and on about details that may not be relevant to what the interviewer is trying to get at, then that's when you kind of know you need to really turn around and get back on track to answering the question. All right. Okay. And so the next part is action. So you describe the situation, what was happening. You describe the task, the specific task that, this was about. And then next you want to go into the action. So what did you specifically do to address the situation? What were the steps that you took? Did you, liaise with your boss? Did you decide to do some research on your own? Did you get a working group together to figure out a task? Did you seek help from a more experienced coworker? Did you take it head on your own? What did you do? And what were the steps you did? Did you do a combination of those things to address whatever the issue was? And results, what was the outcome? What ended up happening? Did you succeed in getting that deliverable out on time? Was it successful and, well acknowledged and utilized? Was this program, implemented on time successfully? How did that thing that you do contribute to the success of either the project or the team or the organization or whatever it is? That result is important, and I think it's often left out when people answer these questions. From my experience in conducting mock interviews with clients, oftentimes people are good at describing the situation, and the steps that they took, but then they don't really explain what the outcome was. And I think one thing that I'll say kind of, and I think it's important with interviews, is I think many of us, we want to be it's great to be humble, about the work we do, especially we don't do a lot of things alone. We're oftentimes working with people and collaborating and part of a team, as we should be. But you do want to demonstrate how the work that you did, how you were a part of it, how you played a role in it, and how it led to some success, whether big or small, because I think success is something that we always think needs to be huge, but it can be just, meeting a deadline or, achieving something that, was not foreseen as being achievable. And so one thing that I will say is when you're in an interview, they're looking to hire you, not your coworker, not your former boss. But they also want to see that you're a team leader. So being able to communicate how you are an asset to a team is key for behavioral interviews and all sorts of interview styles. All right, so I provided a resource and a link, and that's one of the many great resources online that you can use to really look at different situations and understand how to utilize the STAR method. All right. So the next thing that I'll go into is case study interviews. And there's so much that could be said about case study interviews because it really varies by industry and organization. But I do want to give a brief background and some general tips because it's something that you are likely to come across, especially if you are going into any sort of I would say data or business consulting type work. And they often are becoming even more and more popular with organizations to implement a case study as one round of the interview process. Okay, so what is a case study interview? So these are interviews that allow an organization to examine how you would handle a practical situation at work. And so usually the applicant is provided with a scenario or a problem. They're asked to study it, review it, usually in the form of a presentation or like a packet. And they're asked to analyze it and provide a report or a plan of how they would respond to it. And so one thing that I'll note, and this is something that I've learned from my research and from going through a very intensive case study interview process about 1.5 years ago, was that many organizations, they're not necessarily focused on having the absolute right answer. And many times there's not a one way to do things, which is why, creativity is such a huge component of case studies, but they're more interested in the process and that what you've integrated in terms of your experience, knowledge, theories and frameworks that you know of as it relates to answering this question and how you've applied that. And so that's something that's really important. Case studies are really a way to demonstrate that you're able to understand, process, and come up with a plan in an organized way that can demonstrate that you've been able to respond to an issue or a question. Okay, so some tips for some tips for a successful case study interview. Identify key components of the case study. You want to really read through, and I think this is also something that I recommend doing for a job description. Read through, highlight the key components so you kind of know, okay, focus on this, because depending on the organization, they could give you a very lengthy case to read through, or it could be something that's kind of concise where you have to do a lot more deriving from. But with whatever you're given to start, really identify the key components and the key parts of that case study. You want to use your logic, as I mentioned before, organizational tactics to really break down that information. And this is where that, steps are really important in terms of figuring out how to go through a case study. Another point I want to mention is you want to manage, sorry for the typo there, your time efficiently. So case studies could really vary. There are situations where you could be in an interview for a day and have to sit through and do the process on site. There's times when you may be given something on a Friday and have to get it back to them by a Monday. There's often timelines. There's always a timeline associated with that. So really manage your time, or it could be something timed that you have just specific, time to go in. That's usually more so with like tests, more so than case studies where you have to go into a system and you only have a specific amount of time to do it. But being aware of your time so you can manage that is key. All right. And then as I mentioned before, really utilize the knowledge that you have, frameworks, experience to develop and process this. Depending on the case study, you may be able to use outside resources to develop it. And so really utilize what is out there, your knowledge, your background, your experience to succeed in the case study. Right? And I've listed a great source there where you can delve further into that component, that type of interview. Great. So the last kind of interview area that I'm going to review is a skills test. I really won't go into detail about this just because skills tests vary significantly depending on the industry and obviously the type of test. But I will kind of just describe their purpose. And skills tests are something that I think you all listening to this presentation come from different industries. And so you could have very different types of tests that you may be offered. But I think, going over the general components of this, and then I'm happy to provide some resources as well about how to prepare for skills tests or types of skills tests that are out there. Okay, so a skills test is an assessment that is used to evaluate an applicant's proficiency in a certain technical area. So many organizations, especially larger ones or organizations that have positions that they're getting so many applicants in, they use it as a screening tool. Occasionally, you may be tested further along in the application process as a kind of additional way to, weed out applicants. My experience has been through it being after they look at your resume, okay, then do a skills test before an interview. So it's been a screening tool in instances where I've taken skills tests before. So, and the last thing that I'll mention, I mentioned that they vary in your industry, but a lot of skills tests are related to, there's math. So math, analyzing data, interpreting data. For those of you who are in any fields that will involve math, data, numbers, anybody in public health, statistics, things of that nature, those are likely tests that you could come across at a certain point in your career. And so one skills test that I'm very familiar with are math tests that we're looking at being able to problem solve, open-ended questions, multiple choice questions, probability. A lot of those, I know you all took either the SAT or ACT tests. A lot of those similar types of questions are what I've experienced in job interviews where they're trying to test your mathematical skills and your interpretation of statistics as well. All right. So before I jump into giving you a bit more information about the resources that I have, I just wanted to kind of reiterate that this presentation was an overview of the different types of interview questions, some general tips that I have for you all who may be watching this. And I hope that you found it helpful. And please feel free to reach out and provide me with feedback if you have any additional suggestions, or if you would like any additional information about any of the topics that were mentioned. Okay, so my next slide, this current slide I'm on, is about free resources to jumpstart your career search. So if you go onto my website, ChilomboGlobalCareerServices.com, and then /resources, I have all of these resources that are there to help you with the career search. So I've talked a lot about interviewing in this presentation. It was all about interviewing, but I think there's a lot of things that need to be done in order to get to that point where you're getting a lot of interviews. And so a couple of the resources I have are templates. So one template is just a template for organizing your job search. So when you apply to jobs, you can write all the information about the position in there. I'm all about organization. I think it's very helpful to use that. So you can download that for free. Another thing that I have is a job database with over 100 organizations. This job database is mostly for, again, international development, public health, things of that nature. But there's also some general websites that have jobs in other industries. So I highly recommend that you use that. And the password I will also include in further communication as well, or feel free to email me for the password to that. Another thing I have is different resources of blogs that I've written about career development. A podcast I was on, Dr. Huntley, is a great public health career expert who has an amazing podcast. And I also did an Instagram takeover with Public Health Gladiators. For those of you interested in the public health field, it was a day in the life of my current position that I'm in. I have other resources developed by other public health professionals. And so this includes, again, I mentioned Dr. Huntley, who has a podcast, Latonia Bynum. She also was a great research for this presentation, as well as Frances Dean, who is a early career professional like me, who has done a lot of work at the bachelor's level and has some great resources as well. So all of their resources are on there. And then I have just some articles by some professional organizations that I found really helpful to help jumpstart your job search. So I, recommend you go on that link on my website. All of these resources are free, either developed by me, developed by people I collaborate with, or by other organizations that are out there for you to use. Great. So last thing I wanted to do is just provide you all with my contact information. So I'm on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn as Chilombo Careers, and soon to be YouTube as well. And I also, again, have my website and my email address. So please feel free to follow me on all my platforms. My website, check out my website, the services that I offer, as well as my email for you to reach out. One thing that I did not mention is that I offer free 20-minute phone conversations, consultations with all first-time clients. I've been on a bit of a break during this December 2019 holiday period, but I'll be starting back up again in January. So Wednesdays and Sundays from 7 to 10 p.m. Central African time. I do free 30-minute calls with first-time clients. So if you're listening to this and you haven't had a consultation call, feel free to email me to set up a time for that. Great. So I just want to say thank you and acknowledge, of course, I didn't write here, but of course, specifically the number one people that I want to acknowledge is Africa's Tomorrow. Many thanks to Annie for being a great collaborator, and it's been amazing to see your organization grow and to see the work that you and your scholars are doing to really provide these educational opportunities. And it's great to follow the stories and to see how you all are doing an amazing job in university. And as a former Peace Corps volunteer in Rwanda, it's really awesome to see how a lot of you had worked with former Peace Corps volunteers in high school and now are doing great work in university. And so, yeah, I'm happy that we've been able to donate since June of this year 5% of our profits to Africa's Tomorrow. And although I'm just a small business, I really, aside from my public health work, I think education, which of course coincides with public health, is something I'm very passionate about. And so I'm really glad to be able to work alongside you all and support you all in your ventures. And best of luck to you all. Thank you.